Mara Lynn learned early that names were borrowed things. In the river town of Keelford, her mother kept their lives folded into envelopes, rent receipts, clinic bills. A single photograph of a woman in a gala dress whose face had been torn away. The only heirloom was a cracked obsidian pendant on a frayed cord, warm against skin as if it remembered fire. When Mara won a full scholarship to Astorgate Academy in Harborwick, she promised herself she would become the kind of person who could afford truth. Astorgate Academy rose like a polished cliff above the old docks. Its marble steps washed every morning as if salt air were a rumor. Students arrived in black cars with tinted windows. Mara arrived with a duffel bag and a bus ticket stamped in violet ink still in her pocket. The first rule of Astorgate was simple: never look impressed. The second was crueler: never look broke. Mara broke both rules the moment she stared too long at the chandeliered atrium and asked a security guard where the cafeteria was. Her assigned roommate, Celeste Vaughn, smiled with the ease of someone who had never been told no. Celeste's wardrobe came in garment bags. Her laughter came in small doses, measured. On the first night, she asked Mara's last name twice, as if the syllable might reveal a password. "Lynn," Mara said. Celeste nodded slowly, and Mara felt the nod settle like a paperweight on their shared desk. The misfit corner of Astorgate was the Innovation Lab, a sunlit warehouse of 3D printers, soldering fumes, and late-night problem sets. Mara took refuge there, fixing broken microscopes for free and trading her time for access to equipment. That was where she met Jonas Pike, a senior with paint on his knuckles and a habit of speaking in questions. "If your life were a system," he asked one night, "what's the hidden variable you're refusing to solve?" Mara didn't answer, but the pendant on her chest seemed to tighten its cord. A week into term, the campus rumor board lit up with a scandal. Someone had stolen a donor's antique brooch during the founder's dinner. The administration moved like a silent storm, and by morning the whispers had found a target. A photo of Mara Graney, taken from behind, appeared on a private student feed with the caption, "Scholarship girl with sticky fingers." Celeste didn't accuse her outright. She simply offered, in a voice sweet as polished glass, "It's better if you return it quietly. People forgive mistakes. They don't forgive embarrassment." Mara's pulse steadied the way it always did when unfairness tried to rewrite her story. "Search my room," she said. "Call the police if you want, but do it properly." She watched Celeste's smile flicker, the tiniest fracture. That evening, a dean's assistant and 2 resident staff entered the suite with rubber gloves and practiced disappointment. They found the brooch astonishingly beneath Celeste's pillow, wrapped in a napkin from the dinner. Celeste's face drained of color, and Mara understood. The trap hadn't misfired. It had been placed in the wrong bed on purpose. The dean apologized to Mara in a conference room that smelled of leather and expensive coffee. The apology was careful, like a legal document. Then the door opened, and a man in a charcoal suit walked in, carrying a thin folder and an expression that didn't ask permission to exist. "I'm Adrian Vale," he said, "counsel for Northlight Holdings. I'm here because this incident intersects with a matter of corporate security." Mara had never heard of him, but when he said her name, Mara Lynn, he pronounced it the way her mother did, slow and exact. Adrian didn't look old, but he carried time on his shoulders. He asked Mara to step into the hall. "You wear an obsidian pendant," he said quietly. Mara's fingers closed over it. "It's mine." "It used to belong to Dr. Sarah Lynn," he replied, "a chemist who disappeared 15 years ago after exposing falsified trials at Northlight's biomedical subsidiary. She was my mentor." The air seemed to thicken. Mara's mother had never spoken that name. Mara had never known there was a doctor anything in their bloodline. Adrian offered facts with the precision of someone used to disbelief. Sarah Lynn had filed internal reports, then a whistleblower packet. She had been scheduled to testify, then vanished the week before. Her apartment had been scrubbed, her laptop was missing, and that pendant made from a volcanic stone that fractured like glass had been recorded in evidence photos, an identifying detail. "If you're related," Adrian said, "it means 2 things. First, your life is not an accident. Second, someone may still be trying to control it." Mara wanted to call her mother immediately, to demand the story she had been denied. Instead, she swallowed the urge, because she recognized the old fear behind silence, the fear that truth could be used as a weapon. "Why tell me now?" she asked. Adrian's gaze slid toward the closed conference room. "Because the brooch wasn't about jewelry," he said. "It was a rehearsal. Astorgate students become Northlight interns, then managers, then gatekeepers. Someone wanted to see how you react under pressure, and I want you to survive long enough to choose your own reaction. Over the next month, Mara lived 2 lives. By day, she attended classes, earned top marks, and kept her head down around the gilded crowd. By night, she met Adrian at a cafe near the harbor, where fishermen still argued over weather like it mattered. He taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to trace shell companies, how to recognize the shape of a cover-up. Jonas, noticing the new shadows under her eyes, began leaving her energy bars and handwritten notes, small kindnesses that made her chest ache. One note read, "If you're fighting a ghost, don't do it alone." The deeper Mara looked, the less the story resembled the neat tragedy Northlight had printed in old press releases. The Whistleblower packet existed, but key pages were missing. A sub-study had been quietly reclassified, and a side effect had been buried under a statistical trick. The missing pages, Adrian believed, were stored on a legacy system called the Vault, a server cluster built in the early days of Northlight, when men in suits thought code was eternal. Access required an outdated token, a physical device with a unique signature, and Adrian had seen that signature once, years ago, on a student ID badge in a photo from Astorgate's archives. That badge belonged to Celeste's father, Grant Vaughn, now Northlight's chief compliance officer, an elegant title for a man rumored to make problems disappear. Suddenly, Celeste's smile made sense, not as malice alone, but as inherited strategy. Mara began to watch Celeste the way you watch a locked door, not because you hate it, but because you know what it protects. At midterm, Astorgate announced the Northlight Challenge, a prestigious competition to solve a real-world problem using data provided by the company. Winners earned internships, scholarships, and the kind of recommendation letters that opened lifelong gates. Celeste formed a team instantly, popular students, polished resumes, confident voices. Mara joined a smaller team in the Innovation Lab, with Jonas and 2 quiet coders, Lynn Tran and Omar Shaw. Their problem set concerned public health logistics in coastal towns. It looked harmless. That was what made Mara suspicious. The dataset included patient records supposedly anonymized, yet Mara noticed a pattern. Timestamps that repeated too neatly, regions that vanished from maps, variables that looked like they had been sanitized by someone afraid of edges. Lynn wrote a script to test entropy. Omar found identical noise signatures across different fields. Jonas, who had grown up in foster care and could smell institutional lies, muttered, "This isn't data. It's a confession in disguise." Mara felt the pendant warm, as if agreeing. One rainy evening, Mara returned to the dorm to find her desk drawer slightly open. Nothing seemed missing, but her skin prickled. She checked the underside of the drawer. A tiny dot of clear resin, fresh. Someone had planted a tracker, or a microphone, or simply wanted her to know she was being watched. She didn't confront Celeste. Instead, she took out her notebook, a notebook of coded margins, and began to write in the margins the way Adrian had taught her. Dates, faces, patterns, questions. Then she turned her phone off and walked to the docks, where the wind could drown secrets. Adrian met her under the awning of the cafe. When Mara described the resin dot, his jaw tightened. "They're escalating," he said. "We need leverage, not rumors, proof." He slid a small item across the table, a silver whistle. "This is from Sierra's kit," he said. "Not a whistle for alarms, one for dogs. She used it when she visited the coastal clinic where your mother worked. The clinic's old storeroom might still have her field box. If the box exists, it could contain the missing pages, or at least a trail." Kielford was 3 hours away by bus. Mara went alone the next morning, wearing a plain coat and a hat pulled low. The bus windows fogged with breath and rain. She held a bus ticket stamped in violet ink again, different date, same violet stamp, and felt time loop. When she reached the clinic, the building looked smaller than memory, like a stage set left behind. The new receptionist recognized her immediately. "Your mom said you might come," the woman whispered, as if the walls had ears. "She left something for you." In a back room stacked with paper files, Mara found her mother waiting. Maylin's hair had more gray now, but her hands were steady. She didn't start with apologies. She started with the only honest thing. "I lied to keep you alive," she said. Then she told Mara about Sarah, her older sister, brilliant and stubborn, who believed science could be clean if people were brave. May had helped Sarah gather evidence. After Sarah disappeared, May had fled, changing cities, changing jobs, hiding the pendant because it was both proof and a target. "I wanted you to have a normal life," May said, "but normal is a luxury we never owned." May led Mara to an old metal cabinet and pried it open with a key taped beneath the sink. Inside was a field box stained by salt water, and inside that was a sealed plastic pouch. The pouch held a folded map, a faded orchard map, and a slim flash drive wrapped in wax paper. Sarah said if anything happened, follow the orchard map, May whispered. Mara stared at the hand-drawn roots, the marked trees, the annotation. Vault token in the roots. The words didn't make sense yet, but they felt like a hand reaching out from the past. Back at Astorgate, Mara didn't go to her dorm. She went straight to the innovation lab, where Jonas was asleep on a beanbag chair, laptop open on his chest. He jolted awake when she entered and, seeing her face, sat up without questions. Lynn and Omar joined them after midnight. Mara placed the flash drive on the table. "This is why they framed me," she said. "Because they're afraid of what my aunt left behind, and because they think I'll fold. I'm not folding." Jonas nodded once. "Then we build something they can't delete," he said. They copied the flash drive's contents onto multiple encrypted vaults, then began reading. Sarah's notes were meticulous, written in calm language that made the horror sharper. Patient harm, manipulated endpoints, emails ordering staff to correct the narrative, and a list of names, executives, auditors, lawyers, some still in power. Grant Vaughn's name appeared twice, both times beside the same phrase. "Cleans the hallway before anyone sees the blood." Mara's hands shook, but she kept reading until the shaking turned into steel. The Northlight Challenge finale approached. Celeste's team, armed with glossy slides, spoke confidently about optimization and impact. Mara's team prepared a different kind of presentation, a demonstration. Using the competition dataset, they had reverse-engineered the anonymization process and revealed anomalies consistent with deliberate concealment. They also built a public tool that allowed journalists and regulators to verify the integrity of data releases without seeing patient identities. It was elegant, technical, and most importantly, unignorable. 2 days before the finale, Mara received an invitation to meet Grant Vaughn himself, off campus, at Northlight's glass tower. The email sounded polite. It smelled like a trap. Adrian advised against it. Jonas offered to come. Mara went anyway, but not alone. She wore a tiny camera clipped inside her collar, and had Lynn monitoring audio from the lab. In the tower's lobby, the air was too clean. Grant Vaughn greeted her as if she were family. "Miss Lynn," he said, smiling. "Or should I say, Doctor, Lynn's niece." In a conference room overlooking the harbor, Grant poured tea and spoke about opportunity. He said Mara had talent. He said Northlight valued resilience. He said mistakes in the past were complex. Then he made his real offer: a private scholarship, a job for her mother, a comfortable apartment, if Mara handed over the flash drive and kept quiet. "You can be safe," Grant said softly. "Safety is the only currency that matters when the storm comes." Mara looked at the city below, the small boats pushing against tide, and she understood. He believed safety was something you gave up pieces of yourself to buy. Mara set her cup down and smiled, just a little. "You framed me with a brooch," she said. "You thought I'd be grateful for mercy." Grant's smile didn't move. "I didn't frame you," he said. "Children do childish things. Celeste is impulsive." Mara leaned forward. "Then why did your keycard open the dorm's service corridor at 214A? On the night my drawer was tampered with?" She watched his pupils tighten. Somewhere in Lynn's headset, a quiet gasp escaped. Grant had slipped microseconds of truth in a practiced face. Grant's tone cooled. "You're clever," he said. "Clever people survive by knowing when to stop." He stood and walked to the window, hands behind his back like a man admiring his own empire. "Your aunt believed the world rewarded bravery. It doesn't. It rewards silence. If you keep pushing, you'll turn your mother into collateral." Mara felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. "You already tried," she said. "You failed. I'm here because she survived you." On the way out, a security guard tried to accidentally bump her into a side hallway. Mara turned at the last moment, letting the guard's shoulder hit empty air. She walked faster, heartbeat loud, until she reached the lobby. Outside, rain hammered the pavement. Adrian waited under a streetlight. He didn't ask if she was scared. He asked, "Did we get what we needed?" Mara tapped the hidden camera. "He confessed without words," she said. Adrian exhaled, the first sign of relief she'd seen on him. "Then we make the words appear." The finale was held in Astorgate's auditorium, packed with donors, students, and Northlight executives in identical suits. Celeste took the stage first, her voice bright, her slides polished. When Mara's team walked up, Celeste's gaze sharpened into something like panic. Mara began with a simple statement. Data is a story. If you edit the story, people get hurt. Then Lynn triggered the demo. The screen filled with verifiable markers, highlighting inconsistencies that could not be explained by accident. Omar explained the math. Jonas spoke last, not about code but about trust. The room went unnaturally still. Then Mara played the short clip from Northlight's tower. Grant Vaughn offering safety in exchange for silence, hinting at threats against Mei Lin. She didn't accuse. She let his words hang in the air like smoke. Gasps scattered. A donor stood up, face red. A reporter in the back raised a phone to record. An executive began to shout about context and illegally obtained recordings. Mara's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. If your context requires fear, she said, your context is a crime. Northlight's legal team surged forward. Adrian stepped into the aisle, badge visible, calm as a closed door. I'm counsel of record on a whistleblower retaliation case, he announced. This presentation constitutes protected disclosure under applicable statutes. Any attempt to intimidate these students will be documented and prosecuted. The words cut through the noise like wire. For the first time, Mara watched power hesitate. After the auditorium emptied into chaotic clusters, Celeste cornered Mara near the backstage stairs. Her eyes were wet, not with apology, but with rage and betrayal. You ruined everything, Celeste hissed. Do you know what it's like to be born into a machine you didn't build? My father doesn't love me. He uses me. You think you're the hero? You're just another tool. Mara studied her, seeing not a villain but a girl drowning in inherited decisions. Then stop swimming in his direction, Mara said quietly. Swim somewhere else. Celeste's face crumpled for a moment, then hardened. She walked away without answering. In the weeks that followed, regulators requested Northlight's records. Old stories resurfaced. Former employees came forward, encouraged by the student's tool and the public attention. Mei Lin received anonymous threats, but she also received support from clinic coworkers, from neighbors, from strangers who had once believed the company's polished narrative. Mara moved her mother into a safer apartment and installed new locks. She slept lightly, always listening, but she no longer felt alone in the dark. One evening, Jonas found Mara on the roof of the innovation lab, staring at the harbor lights. He handed her a paper cup of hot chocolate and sat beside her without touching. When you first got here, he said, you looked like someone waiting to be told you didn't belong. Mara laughed softly, surprised by the sound. And now? Jonas shrugged. Now you look like someone who decided belonging is something you build. Mara pressed her thumb against the pendant. The crack in its surface caught the light, turning flaw into pattern. Adrian called 2 months later with news. A sealed file had been unsealed, a missing report restored, a court order issued. Grant Vaughn was under investigation. Not convicted yet, but the hallway was no longer clean. Sierra would have liked you, Adrian said. Mara felt a sting behind her eyes. I never met her, she whispered, but I carry her anyway. Adrian's voice softened. That's how ghosts become guides, he replied. On the last day of the semester, Mara walked through Astorgate's atrium again. The chandelier still glittered, the marble still shone, but the air felt different, as if the building had learned it could not swallow every story. Celeste passed her in the corridor, escorted by an administrator. Face pale, phone in her hand, their eyes met. Celeste didn't smile. She mouthed one word. Sorry. It was small, imperfect, and it mattered. Mara boarded the bus back to Keelford with Jonas beside her and Lynn and Omar behind, all of them carrying laptops and winter coats and the strange lightness of people who had done something frightening and survived. The driver tore their tickets and waved them on. Mara sat by the window and watched the academy recede, not as a palace she had invaded, but as a place she had changed. She opened her notebook and wrote a line in the margin. Truth costs, but silence costs more. Then she closed it, leaned her head against the glass, and let the road carry her toward the next chapter she would write on purpose. The weeks after the auditorium were an education in how quickly attention can become another weapon. Students who had never spoken to Mara before approached her with eager admiration, asking for selfies, for their names to be included in the movement, for a piece of the story that made them look brave without requiring bravery. Mara learned to say no without apologizing. She learned that boundaries are not walls, They are filters. People who needed her stayed when she was boring. People who wanted her as decoration left. Astorgate's administration called an emergency student safety forum that sounded supportive until you listened closely. The dean praised civic engagement and then suggested that recording meetings might violate policy. Mara raised her hand and asked which policy had protected her when her room was searched without cause. The dean's answer was a cloud of phrases. Jonas squeezed Mara's wrist under the table. A quiet reminder. Let them talk until they reveal themselves. They did. The administration's real fear was not violence. It was liability. So Mara and Adrian built a second path around the academy. Adrian connected Mara with a nonprofit legal clinic that specialized in whistleblower retaliation and student rights. The clinic didn't offer comfort. It offered templates. How to file a complaint, how to request records, how to preserve chain of custody when digital evidence is involved. Lynn integrated those templates into the guide she was writing. Knowledge doesn't feel heroic. It feels like paperwork. That's why it works. Northlight's countersuit escalated into a procedural maze. Mara received a letter accusing her of interference with contractual relations. The language was so grand it almost sounded like parody. Still, the paper made her palms sweat. May, seeing her daughter's face tighten, said gently, "This is what they do when they can't deny you. They try to exhaust you." May had lived through exhaustion as a survival method. Mara refused to inherit that as fate. She requested protective orders. She demanded narrow scopes. She made every demand formal. She forced the company to spend money on every attempt to intimidate her. Grant Vaughn tried to pull the conflict back into private rooms. He requested a confidential mediation session and offered what he had offered before: scholarships, housing, support. Adrian refused to let Mara attend. Mara wanted to go anyway, not because she craved confrontation, but because she wanted to watch Grant's face when he realized he no longer controlled the stage. Adrian compromised. He brought her as a silent observer, surrounded by attorneys and a court reporter, turning Grant's preferred darkness into a lit hallway. In mediation, Grant performed regret without admitting wrongdoing. He called Sierra a brilliant scientist and then described her as unstable in the same breath. He blamed rogue subordinates. He blamed complex timelines. He blamed unfortunate misunderstandings. Mara listened until the performance began to sound like the wedding again, a practiced smile trying to make humiliation feel inevitable. She leaned toward the microphone and said one sentence. If you respected her, you wouldn't have erased her. The room went still. Grant's lawyer asked that the statement be stricken. The court reporter typed it anyway. Paper remembers. That night, Celeste texted Mara from an unknown number. There were no greetings, no apologies, only coordinates and a time. Jonas said it was a trap. Lynn said it might be a drop. Omar said both could be true. Mara went with Jonas and kept Lynn on a live line. The coordinates led to a public library near the harbor, old enough that its windows were warped, making the city lights outside look like distorted stars. Celeste waited between stacks, hood up, hands shoved deep in her pockets like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. Celeste didn't plead. She didn't ask to be forgiven. She said, very quietly, "He's moving the remaining vault mirrors." Mara asked who. Celeste swallowed. "My father. The security vendor. They're migrating legacy servers to a private facility so regulators can't image them." Mara's heart rate jumped. That kind of move could erase months of work. Celeste handed over a flash drive. "This is a route log," she said, "and a schedule. If you act fast, you can catch them while they're in transit." Jonas stared at her. "Why are you giving this to us?" Celeste's mouth twitched. "Because he promised he would protect me if I did what he asked. And he never keeps promises. I'm tired of being his collateral." Mara wanted to ask why Celeste had ever been willing to plant the brooch, but she recognized the truth. The question was not useful tonight. The useful thing was the drive. They verified it immediately, cross-checking the route against public permit databases and shipping manifests Omar could access through a friend at the docks. The logs matched. Celeste had given them something real. Adrian moved within hours. He filed an emergency motion and obtained an order to preserve evidence. The next morning, regulators intercepted 2 trucks, leaving a Northlight facility. Drivers confused and irritated, security personnel suddenly polite. The seized hardware did not contain everything, but it contained enough. That interception changed the legal posture. Northlight could still delay, but it could no longer credibly claim it was cooperating. The interception also changed Celeste. Not into a hero, but into someone who had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She stopped sitting with her usual group. Her social circle treated her like a cracked vase, still decorative, but dangerous to touch. Mara watched Celeste move through the cafeteria alone and felt a familiar loneliness. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. Systems punish traitors more than they punish predators. As the case grew louder, the Coastal Families Network grew braver. Omar's sister organized a meeting in a community hall where fishermen hung their jackets on chairbacks and mothers held their phones like shields. A public health attorney explained their rights. A therapist explained trauma responses without pity. Mara explained documentation protocols. One father asked why a college student was teaching them how to fight a corporation. Mara answered, "Because they expected me to be quiet, and if I can be loud with evidence, so can you." The father nodded, like he'd been waiting for permission to be angry. The first hearing with regulators present was not dramatic, but it was historic. Northlight's counsel tried to argue that the legacy data was unreliable. Adrian responded by introducing the mirrored records and a chain of custody trail built from Mara's team's public changelog. Lynn's decision to publish updates, time-stamped and immutable, became a legal asset. Code, when documented, can be testimony. The hearing ended with an order for deeper discovery. And in the hallway afterward, Adrian's hands shook slightly for the first time. He looked at Mara and said, "Sarah is finally being heard." For Mara, the strangest consequence was internal. The pendant stopped feeling like an anchor, dragging her backward. It began to feel like a compass. She started thinking about what she wanted after the case, beyond survival. The idea felt unfamiliar. People who grow up hiding don't practice wanting. Jonas asked her, on the roof of the lab, what she would study if she wasn't fighting. Mara stared at the harbor and said, "Security, data integrity, the things that make lies harder." Jonas smiled. "That's still fighting," he said. Mara replied, "Maybe, but maybe it's building." When winter break ended, Mara returned to Astergate with new policies in place. The rumor board had been shut down, not out of ethics, but out of fear of lawsuits. Dorm searches now required written justification. Donors funded a new ethics initiative with glossy brochures. Mara read the brochures and kept her skepticism intact. Initiatives are easy. Enforcement is hard. So she focused on enforcement. She trained scholarship students to keep private logs, taught them how to request records, and encouraged them to find allies outside the Academy's hierarchy. The guide Lynn wrote became the handbook for a quiet network. Celeste approached Mara one evening near the innovation lab. Her face looked thinner, as if she had been shedding a life like a coat. "I'm transferring," Celeste said. Mara waited. Celeste continued. "My father said if I left, I'd lose everything. I realized I don't know what everything is if it requires being his instrument." She looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time the words didn't sound like a performance. Mara nodded once. She did not offer friendship. She offered truth. "You don't get to undo it," Mara said, "but you can choose what you do next." Celeste swallowed and whispered, "That's what I'm trying to learn." By spring, the regulators' findings became public. Not all of them, some were sealed, but enough to ignite a broader inquiry. Northlight's stock dipped. The board announced an internal independent review that was anything but. Yet the family's case moved forward anyway, because courts care less about press statements than about affidavits and emails and preserved logs. The machinery tried to spin. The ledger kept it from floating away. On a quiet afternoon, May and Mara visited the clinic storeroom again. The cabinet was still there, the key still taped under the sink like a stubborn joke. May touched the metal and said, "I kept this because I thought it would protect you, but it only protected the secret." Mara took her mother's hand briefly, awkwardly, because their love had been trained to be practical, and said, "It got us here. Now we do something else." May's eyes shone, and for the first time she didn't look afraid of the truth being spoken out loud. When finals arrived, Mara sat for exams like any other student. The ordinary work felt almost sacred. She passed her classes with honors. She won no plaques. She didn't want them. She wanted a future that didn't require her to beg for dignity. On the last night of the semester, Jonas walked her to the bus stop and asked, "Are you scared of what comes next?" Mara considered. The threat hadn't vanished. The lawsuits were still moving. The corporation still had money. But she said, "I'm scared of going back to pretending." Jonas nodded. Then don't, he said. And Mara for once believed that not pretending was possible. They went to the orchard because Sarah had never written in metaphors unless she had to. The map led them past a sagging fence and a row of trees older than the clinic itself, trunks scarred by generations of knives carving initials and promises. Mara dug with her hands until her nails were black and her wrists ached, then struck metal under the roots of the oldest tree. Inside the rusted tin was a broken access token and a letter sealed in wax paper. The letter was addressed to May, but it read like it knew Mara would be the one to open it. A precise description of the vault, the missing pages, and the names of the people who had ordered the scrub. Sarah didn't beg for revenge. She begged for continuity. She wrote that truth only survives when it has somewhere safe to live. Back in Harborwick, Mara treated the token like a fragile fossil. Lynn examined its circuitry under a lamp in the innovation lab, and Omar traced its signature against the legacy authentication protocols Adrian had described. The token was damaged, but not dead. Jonas, who understood survival by patching broken things, asked a simpler question: who still had access to the vault door even if the key was cracked? The answer arrived in the form of a calendar invite that Celeste accidentally left open on her tablet during a dorm meeting, an invitation to a compliance review at Northlight's tower, hosted by her father and attended by a private security vendor with a history of erasing evidence. Mara didn't confront Celeste. Confrontation would warn the machinery. Instead, she did what she had been doing since the brooch. She built redundancy. Adrian filed a protected disclosure packet with regulators and used his counsel status to place parts of Sarah's notes under privilege. Mara's team published their verification tool with a public changelog so it could not be quietly altered. They also created a mirrored repository under a university consortium. Every copy was an argument against deletion. Northlight responded the way institutions respond when threatened by a student. They tried to shrink her into a headline. A spokesperson called Mara's auditorium clip selectively edited and implied she had invaded private property. A donor blog framed the scandal as youthful entrepreneurial disruption, as if whistleblowing were a branding exercise. Mara refused interviews that wanted sound bites. When she did speak, she spoke in parameters and evidence. She gave journalists a folder of verifiable artifacts and told them not to quote her feelings. Some reporters left. They wanted drama. The ones who stayed wanted facts, and facts kept multiplying. Omar's sister, a nurse in the coastal network, recognized the towns listed in Sarah's files. She had heard about the rare cluster that was always explained away as bad luck. She helped connect families who had been quietly paid to sign non-disclosure agreements after sudden complications. The families began to compare notes, and comparison turned their isolated grief into pattern. The first family to break their NDA did it with trembling hands and a signed affidavit. By the third family, the trembling slowed. By the 10th, it stopped. Grant Vaughn tried to retaliate with procedure. Northlight filed a countersuit claiming trade secret theft and reputational damage. Adrian answered with motions that exposed intimidation. Subpoenas aimed at students, wellness checks disguised as surveillance, and a series of communications that described Sarah's work as a corridor that must be cleaned. The judge's order granting protection read like a public reprimand. Northlight could still fight, but they could not pretend they were simply misunderstood. Meanwhile, Celeste's world began to crack. She stopped attending dinners. She skipped a donor brunch and was photographed leaving the tower with her father's security chief. Rumors followed her the way perfume follows a wealthy hallway. Mara did not add to them. She watched, and she waited, because people who are used as tools often either become sharper weapons or drop the handle entirely. The choice isn't dramatic. It's slow and private. One night, an anonymous message arrived in the encrypted Dropbox Lynn had built. It contained a single internal calendar entry and a time-stamped badge log from 15 years ago, corroborating the week Sarah vanished and placing Grant Vaughn in the same building as Sarah's last scheduled meeting. The metadata was clean, but the style was familiar. The clipped formatting Celeste used in her polished emails, the same habit of double spacing after periods. Mara showed Adrian. Adrian didn't say Celeste's name. He only said, "This is the kind of evidence that moves courts." Celeste didn't become a friend. She became a witness, and witnesses are not required to be lovable. They are required to be brave. Mara understood that bravery could look like one clean leak from behind a locked door. She also understood that Celeste's apology would never undo the brooch, but it might prevent another brooch from ever being planted. The innovation lab turned into a war room that smelled like solder and instant coffee. Lynn wrote a guide for scholarship students on digital self-defense and campus power dynamics, how to recognize grooming disguised as mentorship, how to document without endangering yourself, how to store receipts in places that outlast student accounts. The guide spread faster than the old rumor board ever had. It was shared in group chats, printed and taped inside dorm closets, and read by kids who had learned to survive by being invisible. For the first time, invisibility looked less like safety and more like a choice. Jonas confronted his own history in the middle of all this. Not because the plot demanded it, but because being near Mara made it harder to accept lies about himself. He told her about foster homes that rewarded silence, about caseworkers who used kindness as leverage, about the strange ache of being praised for resilience when what you wanted was a stable door that stayed shut. Mara listened and didn't try to fix him. She simply stayed. That was how they kept choosing each other, not by declaring it, but by showing up when the world tried to isolate them. May joined a community meeting in Kielford, where older women spoke of accidents that had never been investigated. Miscarriages dismissed as stress, fevers treated like personal failures, side effects explained away as weather. Mara recorded every testimony with consent, then offered each speaker a copy and a way to retract if they needed. Archive building is only ethical when it respects the people inside it. The archive grew into a living record, a counterweight to corporate amnesia. When regulators finally obtained access to Northlight's legacy systems, the vault did not open with a cinematic flourish. It opened in pieces. The token's cracked signature was enough to validate a read-only mirror of the missing pages, and those pages confirmed what Sarah had written: falsified endpoints, reclassified adverse events, and a chain of sign-offs that climbed higher than anyone had admitted. The most damning part was not the science. It was the emails. Executives arguing about narrative, about risk tolerance, about how many families would accept hush money versus how many would go to court. Northlight's board attempted a controlled implosion. They offered Grant Vaughn as a scapegoat and promised reform. They staged press statements with concerned faces and careful language. Mara watched the performance and refused to be grateful. She wanted restitution and structural change, not a sacrificial mask. Adrian negotiated aggressively. And for the first time in years, he sounded less like counsel and more like a person who had loved a mentor and never gotten to mourn properly. At the semester's end, Astergate tried to celebrate Mara's team as innovators, offering a plaque and a photo shoot. Mara declined the photos. She accepted only one thing: funding to keep the verification tool independent and free. She insisted the money be administered by an outside consortium rather than the Academy's donor committee. The dean looked startled, then relieved, as if someone had finally told him the truth about how gifts become strings. On the last day before winter break, Mara placed the whistle on a new cord beside the pendant, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that alarms are meant to be heard and that silence is never neutral. She looked at the cracked obsidian and realized the crack was not damage anymore. It was history made visible. Some